Hello, welcome back to teleSUR English. We now go live to Geneva to broadcast live the statements of Venezuela's Vice President Delcy Rodriguez at the 40th session of Universal Periodic Review.
A threat to the U.S. a whole host of unilateral coercive measures and other restrictive measures, punitive measures, without any basis in international law that generated sanctions that were illicit and illegitimate against the whole of the Venezuelan people. 5 years went by, closing the space for exercise of human rights for Venezuelans due to the introduction of these unilateral coercive measures. There has been direct impact because of representatives of countries that are part of this Human Rights Council. In this council, there's the government of the United States of America that in a perverse, underhand way managed to bring about this range of coercive measures. 502 measures. In this council, there's also the government of the United Kingdom that adopted the legitimate decision to deny the Venezuelan people of their rights, and we've seen the impact of this in the COVID-19 pandemic. President and esteemed representatives, something is badly wrong when in the same room, in the same global hall or forum where we're supposed to be guaranteeing human rights, we see victims and aggressors sitting side by side. And we see this hegemonic struggle for power and domination. So we cannot be indifferent in the face of these serious violations of human rights. Be indifferent and complicit. Because one of the items on the agenda of this Human Rights Council, and we raise our voice to ensure that we shed light and study measures that can help countries that are indeed victims of such measures that violate international law. There are a number of issues to examine. The human rights system, and we have very carefully read each of the reports. I would like to explain one example, a specific example, because of the serious nature of this, and that's the report from the UNHCR. In 2020, the UNHCR certified that Colombia was the country with the largest number of IDPs because of the armed conflict and violence. 8.3 million in IDPs. But the question then is that Venezuela is a neighboring country. Where is this going to stop? The millions of Colombians that flee the violence because of the paramilitaries, the drug trade. Where did they end up? Our Colombian brothers and sisters. Of course, Venezuela's reputation goes before it, and we have a very generous system for welcoming our brothers and sisters and upholding their human rights. In 2021, there was a tendentious complaint with some failings in it, and it turned Colombia into the first country with the number of IDPs to the second country, the second country receiving the largest number of migrants. There seems to be a bit of a mathematical error there, and it's a bit dangerous because it seems to point to Venezuela, because supposedly there's an artificial creation of war, humanitarian crisis that the U.S. has publicized as something going on in Venezuela that needs to be dealt with. Now, UNHCR and its authorities called the Venezuelan migrants economic migrants, and this is all down to the criminal embargo upon our country. We see here the political instrumentalization of human rights. Another example of this, which stems from the same thing, and this is to do with the inequality in the political of the northern part of the world, the northern hemisphere and the south. And we've seen this in the International Criminal Court of Venezuela quite recently with the prosecutor of the ICC signed a memorandum of understanding to try to bolster through technical assistance our capacity within our justice system and our national jurisdiction. But when we look at the map of the cases that are before the ICC, we see that there's an imbalance between the north and the south. This imbalance is blatant also when we come to the enjoyment of international human rights. We also see the reflection of the accumulation of wealth. When we look at the difference between 1980 and 2020, look at how the wealth is concentrated in the north. Also, we have the recent events of COVID-19 and the vaccination programs. We can see the inequalities here. Look at Africa in the red, very low levels of vaccination. And this has also further entrenched the variants that have been emerging, because humanity still hasn't understood that either we move forward together to a solution or we will continue to remain divided. Another thing, and against the global context, we have the third UPR. In addition to the inequality and the accumulation of wealth, we have seen an increase in violence over the past number of years. Is this the context within which we can see the enjoyment of human rights, not just in Venezuela, but in countries of the world which have been impacted by war and conflict? And one of the most serious problems that humanity is facing, of course, is the threat to the environment and to the human species itself. This, in the context of a criminal blockade to our country, Venezuela has indeed submitted its third UPR, not without its difficulties, of course, because we have had frustrated attempts at magnitude, undermining our vital infrastructure, economic war, an expansion of unilateral coercive measures that are used as arms of mass destruction, systematically and indiscriminately affecting the enjoyment of human rights in Venezuela. So it's against this backdrop that we mention that we've brought the unilateral coercive measures to the International Court. Because, of course, as I've said, this just further entrenches the imbalance between the North and the South. But we've been courageous. Venezuela must stand up and speak out for our people in the worst kind of circumstances, the worst time, economic asphyxiation, where we've seen 99% of our income drop in 2020. Venezuela could not respond in equal conditions to the COVID-19 pandemic because our resources were blocked. The acquisition of material, of vaccines. And furthermore, the UK and the Bank of England prevented Venezuela from using its own resources to be able to deal with the pandemic in Venezuela, but we were able to deal with it because of our universal healthcare system. We're talking about distribution of wealth, but the actual concept of Bolivarian socialism, of equality, social justice, where the main concern is to ensure that human beings are at the center of every situation. By doing this, we were able to take care of our population. And we're proud to say that we have very promising numbers when it comes to the control of the pandemic. Now, we don't know what's going to happen next because, of course, there's a great deal of uncertainty surrounding the variants that may emerge. But Venezuela is firm in its belief that we can uphold our universal healthcare system. It has been successful in the way it's managed the pandemic. I must also underscore the commitment of the Venezuelan state for the full enjoyment of civil and political rights. In merely 20 years, Venezuela has held 29 elections as part of a democratic process. Venezuela also guarantees social, economic rights. We just need to look at the Gini index to see that Venezuela is one of the few least unequal countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have provisions for food and housing, free education, free vaccination, and this is available to the whole of the population. Must also highlight the progress we've made on consolidation and reform of our justice system. Our goal is always, of course, to uphold the human rights of the Venezuelan people. Now, we're talking about our country's heroic resistance, and today I must say that in these 5 years, since 2016 and 2022, Venezuela, at the end of the last quarter of 2021, saw a growth in its GDP of 7.7%. This is a demonstration of our people's ability, of the belief that we are a good people, we're a peaceful people, and a generous people. We've also worked hand in hand with the OHCHR. Always upholding the principles of human rights of independence, impartiality, no political interference, we accept the 193 recommendations, but we adopted 24 voluntary commitments as part of our second UPR. The system of human rights needs to be at the service of the peoples, to try to right the balances, to try to ensure that they reach out to people's conscience. Venezuela, that has been attacked and injured, can, however, show a great deal of progress. But we're also fully mindful of the challenges ahead. And this is why we have established hotlines, ways of providing assistance in cooperation with the OHCHR. Venezuela will continue to battle, will continue to fly the flag of sovereignty and self-determination. I'd like to close with the most universal Venezuelan, Francisco de Miranda, that participated in the liberation of France and the independence of the US. He said, "My only goals were and will be always to promote happiness and prosperity for my own country. Let's turn any aggressions of minorities, those that have divergent models, let's channel this into transformative energy for the social well-being of our peoples. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Her Excellency.
We were watching live the statements of Venezuela's Vice President Delcy Rodriguez at the 40th session of Universal Periodic Review. Delcy Rodriguez referred to the regional situation regarding human rights and previous assessments in the region regarding also the human rights in the region, while mentioning the Colombian case and how that nation's government blames Venezuelan migrants there as the crisis igniters, when there are displacements, state-sponsored violence, and other social issues. The Venezuelan vice president also stressed that the northern region of Colombia, in the common border with Venezuela, sees frequent violent incursions affecting the adjacent communities. Rodriguez referred to how Venezuela was economically impaired facing COVID-19 because of U.S. sanctions and the freezing of national assets abroad, preventing the country from the acquisition of protective equipment and vaccines and drugs, but highlighted the citizenship effort and the governmental management that allowed the people to overcome the hardest stages of the pandemic. She also referred to recent elections and the democratic processes in the nation. teleSUR English will bring you more details in upcoming briefs. Stay with us.